when you say it, it comes across as, okay, stop doing what you're doing and do it this way. And I'm just wondering, hey, can it be done this way? So this like kind of implicit megaphone that you get, which is simply not something that you're used to as a founding CTO.
Hello, hello.
Joel, how's it going? It's very good to meet you.
It's so good to meet you. I'm really excited. Where are you calling in from today?
Midtown Manhattan. That's it's the global headquarters of Yieldstreet.
Is it like a ghost town now there?
A little less so than it was about a couple of months ago, but yeah, it's weird. It's weird to look down on Park Avenue and see like a sixth of the number of cars that you typically see during the rush hour. So it's weird, man. It's strange to be in the city. A little less so now, but May and June, where it's like, what is going on? First time I walked through Times Square. It's good. It's the city's kind of waking up a little bit, and it's always good to see this. There's so much velocity in the town in general. So it was just bizarre. It's like half expecting zombies to come walking out in the middle of the day, but luckily it's coming back. Hopefully it just continues that way.
Are you prepared for the zombie apocalypse?
When are we not?
I know,
right? It's going to happen. No, but man, I'm telling you, walking through Times Square at 11 a.m. and not seeing more than two people is just weird.
I knew you were going to be a good person to talk to when I was reading your bio, and it said that you want to retire within walking distance of the Lagavulin distillery.
Yes. Work is underway for that.
Yep.
Scoped out a little cottage and stuff. I take it you're a Scotch person as well?
Our producer, Jake, is really into it. He's been over there to visit, and I learned about it through the show Parks and Recreation.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Interesting that I discovered Lagavulin through a TV show as well. It was in an episode of The West Wing. It's amazing.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about, we just kind of like hang out. Is that cool? We're not going to do like an official start or anything.
Love that.
So I was just curious, like, what is your origin story? How did you get started like with technology?
Oh, that's just fun. So, so my family owns a bookshop, or owned a bookshop back in India where I grew up. And I used to work there in the summers. And one summer in 1986, I think, I was 13 or 14 years old. And I saw this book, and it was called You and the Computer. It was like it was a kid's book, really. It was to get little young adults and teenagers. When computers in the 80s in India, especially, were a fascinating new thing, right? World around in general, but certainly back in India. So I started reading this, and I was like, "This is incredible. I want to do something with it." So there was an opportunity in my high school at the time where a gentleman came in and started teaching basic programming. And on weekends, he would bring in a little like keyboard and a monitor, and he would give these like fun exercises, actual programming exercises to work on. And I wrote my first program when I was 14 to this little program in BASIC to try convert Celsius to Fahrenheit or something like that. And I was hooked, and especially once we learned loops, and you can you're able to build patterns using ASCII characters. And hey, this is an interesting looking carpet that you can build just with 3 lines of code. And that was it. That was the kicker. So that's kind of how I got fascinated with the idea of computers, right? And they were nearly not as ubiquitous as they are now. And then as I kind of went to college and stuff, I went to undergrad back in India, and computer science was not offered as a program in the school that I went to. I would have had to move to a different city, one that I don't particularly enjoy living in, Bombay, or Mumbai as it's called now. So I couldn't study computer science as a major in undergrad. So I did mechanical engineering. But when I came here for grad school, I got the opportunity to stay in mechanical engineering, but kind of like branch out in computer science by using computer science to solve mechie problems. So my very first real programming experiences were solving these incredibly complex algorithmic problems in computational theory and design theory, which was kind of like a double whammy for me, because all of that theoretical mechie was new to me, as well as the hardcore C programming, which I hadn't done a lot of. But it's one of those things where there is a click in your head. It's like you just realize, I get this and I love this. And that was it. And from the early 90s to here where we are, early 20s now, my whole life has been about computers, one way or another. It's been a fascinating little journey. But still remember the first program I wrote, though. It's fun.
What was it?
Yeah, it was the Celsius to Fahrenheit thing. It's like it was a little thing where, it would take a little input from standard in, take in a number, did error checking to see if it was a numerical value. It was I was pretty impressed with myself at 14 years old, and then it would do a reverse conversion back as well. Do you want to go back from Fahrenheit to Celsius? And you would do that. And then the second one was building a pattern using for loops. And I wish I still had access to that source code from back then. It was so much fun.
Right. We didn't have GitHub back then.
No. I don't even think we had CVS or PVCS back then,
So what was your first major job solving problems? Like you talked a little bit about it. You were solving some algorithms, but can you give me more context?
Sure. So in a non-commercial capacity, my first big kind of software endeavor was actually my master's thesis at Cornell, where the underlying domain was something called MEMS, micro electromechanical systems. Essentially, these are like chip dimension, nano dimension devices that, unlike chips, which are static in nature, they move. Like you could vibrate a little silicon beam with voltage and with capacitance and stuff like that. So essentially, the fabrication technology was largely similar to what is used today to manufacture chips, but you had all these movable parts in there, so the failure rate was really high. And what we were trying to do at Cornell was actually a joint research project between professors at Cornell and students and Xerox, which as you know has been one of the big pioneering institutions in the world, both in computer science and hardware technology, right? So with PARC and stuff like that. So I was actually working on a jointly funded project, or Xerox funded project, to build a kind of semi-automated environment to simulate the manufacture of these devices. The whole goal was to reduce the failure, increase the yield of these products, because we had a failure rate of 95% in the nanofabrication lab at Cornell. Basically, if we manufactured 100 devices, 95 would fail. So we wanted to reduce that. And the way to do that was to kind of simulate the conditions of fabrication through actual geometric modeling. So I built this massive 3D modeling, solid modeling application that took in requirements for the device that you wanted. You wanted it to vibrate at this frequency or deflect light at that angle. It would take in all of these parameters and would build up an optimized design for the device, and it would simulate the fabrication of it through the 5 to 9 step process that would actually realize the device. And you would see okay, if you build it like this, you have a 90, it would kind of spit out like a failure confidence level in terms of hey, if you follow these parameters, and if you this is what the device would look like. So it was a big solid modeling program written largely in C, and actually a bit of it in Java because we threw a web interface on top of it. This is 1995, so it was JDK 0.92. It had just been released by Sun. Applets were all the rage at the time. So I built this big solid modeling program to simulate the fabrication of these devices, and I built a Java applet-based interface to actually trigger it. It was so much fun, But that was kind of my first large-scale programming effort, if you will, which, among other things, got me my master's degree. So that helped. And then from a commercial standpoint, my first job out of grad school was actually with an engineering company, Schlumberger. It's a big oil field services company that made hardware and software tools for the Shells and the Chevrons of the world to basically find out where the oil is. So I worked there, again, largely building what they called interpretation engineering software. So these tools would spit out terabytes and petabytes of data from underneath the earth. And we would build programs to essentially do all kinds of geophysical modeling to tell the clients, what is the probability of finding oil? It's basically the core of it. So there's also a lot of pretty hardcore C and C++ and a bit of Corba programming back then as well.
Did you get feedback from them? Like if you had a high confidence rating of oil being here, did you ever hear them come back to you and give you insight?
Well, indirectly, yeah, they would, because the way it worked was they would just hire the company, Schlumberger, to go out onto the oil fields with them with these giant trucks. And there was like this massive data acquisition software called Maxis that would actually, it was embedded software that was in the tool. So this was essentially, firmware level software, which would gather all of the subsurface data and send it back up to the truck, which is where then our software would take over and start crunching that data and give all what they call them logs, these giant graphs essentially of what's underneath the surface. And then they would, and yeah, of course, I mean, the technology was so advanced that we managed to get quite a few home runs with some big oil companies in terms of finding oil. It was actually one of the most fascinating. Now, web development and internet-based software is it's kind of like the most common kind of software that's built. But back then it was so new. I felt like I was just doing some more of the old engineering software. I wanted to do the new shit, the new cool stuff. I want to do Java. Yeah. I want to do servlets and stuff. But now looking back, that's probably some of the most interesting software I've written. It's like all the stuff you learn in theory that you learn in computer science, actually you get to deploy. I mean, these days, how many times do you actually write a sorting algorithm as part of building a web app, right? But back then, you would actually need to care about the computational complexity. Is it, your big O notations actually played into day-to-day work, not just as at an academic level. So it's kind of an interesting time actually back then looking back 20 years.
Did that prepare you well for this current project you're in at Yieldstreet with financial data?
Not really. It did in a way, because the underlying algorithms like Monte Carlo simulations, or any number of numerical methods that we use for modeling, they're pretty, there is a substrate of mathematics that is common to a lot of domains. So to that extent, certainly. I think the difference is really in the volume of the data, at the end of, so from a similarity standpoint, they're both kind of probabilistic / stochastic analyses of what can happen or what may happen. Is there oil? What's the efficient frontier? That kind of stuff. But a lot of the stuff we write, the code we write now at Yieldstreet or elsewhere, I mean, obviously, there is a lot of data science type of work we do here to model our portfolios and do underwriting and stuff like that. But a lot of the other end user facing software is just, it's a basic web app, right? There's not a lot of algorithmic stuff going on. And what there is, it's handled by your framework. So you're really doubling down on building the most engaging, attractive user interface and experience rather than actually going deeper into. So the complexity now is more on a scale and traffic standpoint rather than algorithmic. So it's a little bit of, they're both difficult and not easy problems to solve, but just slightly different areas of complexity.
Why did you decide to get involved with the Yieldstreet project?
So I've been doing fintech for a long time. So starting early 2000 and 2003 is when I started doing some serious work in fintech. In fact, it was the startup back in San Francisco where I lived at the time. And I just got fascinated by it because it's math. I'm not a very good mathematician, but I love dealing with numbers, dealing with algorithms, dealing with solving complex problems. And there is nothing simple about fintech, at least from a modeling standpoint. So, and I just got very interested in the domain. It was a new domain for me because, again, like I said, I come from mechanical engineering and I don't come from that world. But that first experience with a company called Finaplex, which is actually Mike Cagney's one of Mike Cagney's a pretty big name in fintech, founder of SoFi and stuff. It kind of just uh, hooked me in, like in terms of like, oh, there's a lot of interesting problems to solve in this space. So I kind of got into fintech there that way, and then over the years since then, I've been working in some capacity on fintech projects. First, as one of the principals of Gordian Labs, we do a lot of fintech projects. Me and my co-founders and fellow partners in crime, if you will. And then the last 10 years, it's been basically just I moved to New York about 15 years ago, and this is kind of like ground zero for fintech, right? For obvious reasons. I mean, the industry's right here. So first at LearnVest, and then now at Yieldstreet, it just kept going deeper and deeper and more interesting and you would. It's funny that there are so many fintech startups out there. You would think that the space is saturated, but there's so much of domain out there. Like the footprint of the domain itself is so massive. There is always some unsolved problem, some area that is still an obscure corner of the financial services world that can benefit from broader access, from broader democratization. So that's kind of like was the big attraction for me. Because in general, you get attracted to ideas, to products, to companies that are solving a problem that you personally are facing at some level, right? LearnVest started the same way. The lack of access to financial planning for everyday people was why Alexa, the founder, started the company. Millen started Yieldstreet for exactly the same thing. We're coming off of 2008, all of us, and like we're seeing our market portfolios take a massive 50% hit. And like, what are the choices, right? Well, what is available to everyday retail investors outside of the markets? And you have the same basket of ETFs and mutual funds. So, well, there's this whole world out there that's been untapped because it's been largely kind of like covered by people, big check writers, private equity, hedge funds, family offices, that sort of stuff. But it doesn't need to be that way. We can actually deploy technology to broaden the access to these income generating products, which I could have used in 2008 and 9. All of us could have used, but simply didn't exist. So when you're trying to solve a problem like that, you're just a natural draw. So this kind of hits that triple whammy. It's a very interesting, useful problem to solve. The technology is fascinating. And at the end of the day, it's a solid business model, right? It's an AUM business. So it kind of hit that trifecta of things that I was looking for after LearnVest, when I was trying to look at what my next adventure was going to be. And it just hit it. And I was kind of lucky to get introduced to the founders through a common friend. And here we are.
Yeah, because you founded LearnVest, right? You were one of the co-founders there?
I was not technically a co-founder, but I was right there from the very beginning. So okay. So the MVP of LearnVest, if you will, we built out of Gordian Labs, which was kind of this boutique software firm that me and a couple of friends founded. So we did a lot of these, what we call like bench equity projects, where someone came to us with an idea, but hadn't raised any money, but so we just wanted to get off the ground and launch with some minimal MVP. So we did the MVP for LearnVest, and then at the end of that, I kind of just came on board full time. So I was there from more or less the beginning, but I wish I'd been a founder. That would have been pretty sweet.
So what big problems are you excited, or I guess either what big problems are you solving? Because I know you like big problems, so you must be doing something interesting at Yieldstreet, but often people can't talk about those.
Yeah. So, I mean, so obviously without going into specifics, which I can't a lot. I think when you're building a consumer startup, which is what Yieldstreet is at the end of the day, which is what LearnVest was, the domain problems aside, and yeah, they have their own complexity and challenges to address. The kind of problems you're trying to solve they have a lot of portability. They have a lot of commonality. You're trying to figure out how to build a platform that can scale well if you're widely successful. How can you and scale? By scale, I don't just mean like traffic scale, although that's a big part. But also like how do you build something where it becomes so widely successful and popular that you need to scale your own internal team like 100x just to support that incoming. What we do is like we are at the end of the day, we're an investment platform, so we have people in house who manage all of these investments for our investors. So certainly if we go from X to 100x investors, we don't want to go from X to even 10x in terms of our team, which means it's a lot of operational scale that we need to build software for to automate, right? So there's that as well. So, and then there's the team scale itself. Again, that's one of the things that was one of my learnings from LearnVest days, which kind of carried over into Yieldstreet, is when you're in the technology group at any startup, on day zero, day one, you're really focused on one constituency, right? Your user, like, how can you build the best possible product for a user? Now, the importance of that constituency never dims. It stays as important as ever. In fact, even over time, if you pick up traction, it gets bigger and bigger. But then as your own company grows, there's a lot of internal constituencies that become part of your stakeholder space. It's like, now it was just, let's say, me and one other engineer building the MVP, which is more or less what it was at Yieldstreet. And then we had the two founders, and we didn't have like 5 people, right? Back in 2015. But now we have a marketing team, we have an investments team, we have an investor relations team, which is our customer support team. They all need to do their jobs effectively to make the company run smoothly, and they need technology to do that. Now, some of that, a lot of it, in fact, can be bought. Like, fine, you need CRM, you can go with Salesforce. You need marketing automation. There's any number of platforms out there, but all of these involve work that falls onto the technology group. So when something stops working, the connection between Salesforce and Marketo, or our platform and some analytics platform that we're using, it needs to work all the time. And if it doesn't, it falls upon the engineering team. So the idea that your stakeholder space grows as the company grows is something that, a lot of times is not planned for. And this, like, a lot of my learnings are from things that I wish I'd done in the early days, which is the best kind of learnings. So I wish I had collected all this data so that we would have these insights. Now, I wish I had started data collection from day zero. I wish I'd built in logging and telemetry into the core platform right from day zero. And we would have been so much better. We would have so much richer insights today than we do right now. So I went through all of this process in previous experiences, and I was able to bring them into Yieldstreet. And so some of those things are easier than they could have been, or less tricky than they could have been had we not kind of taken some of these steps in the early days. And then it's really, how do we, we've been incredibly, successful in attracting investors, especially in this kind of zero interest or low interest environment. People are looking for opportunities to earn yield, right? So we are always looking for new products to build, and and by new product, it's not just a new deal on the platform, but a new structure, because we want to continue expanding our audience, going. Even today, most of Yieldstreet products are for what's called accredited investors, an SEC designation, which requires a certain income/network levels. For investors' own security, SEC has these restrictions. And obviously, we stay within those for those kinds of products, but we want to expand our product base so that we can actually cover even a broader audience and there are other legal structures and types of products that we can build for those. Now, each of those also comes with its own complexities on the tech side. So we spend a lot of time designing that, building that. And now the tricky part, and this is kind of like a slightly long-winded answer to your initial question of what big challenge is, how do we build an architecture that is abstracted enough to be able to support slight variations of underlying products without having to go back to the drawing board and introduce okay, well, we need to genericize this because otherwise we can't support that. So a lot of the architectural complexity today certainly at Yieldstreet, but I'm sure we're not the only ones, is about how do we design for a future? How do we architect for a future that is not clear yet? Because we don't know what direction we want to take the product in. We have a very good general idea, but the devil is in the details, right? Computers are very unforgiving. You got to tell them exactly what to do. So how do we design our data model? How do we design our microservices so that today they can support all of these debt-based deals, but tomorrow, if we get a really promising deal for our investors, which involves a bit of debt and a bit of equity, can we just add equity support to our engine, or do we have to go back and build an equity engine? Like, those kinds of problems, which we often don't have. And this is just one example, like different industries and spaces have their own version of these, like having to suddenly be hampered in going in a new direction because your tech doesn't support it right off or at least requires a lot of rework to support it. We never want technology to be the limiting factor to grow the business. Quite the opposite. And that takes a lot of architectural design and complexity.
So how do you stay on top of this? Because the organization's like this organism, and revenue is driving what you're able to invest in and things like that. So when you're making these design decisions, or you're trying to wrap your mind around these things and working with your team, does that involve you being like really close with the executive team and understanding the direction there?
Yeah, actually, it's a bit of a lot of different things, and that's certainly one of them. Executive team, all the, but also kind of like the line managers, if you will. Like, we have on the what we call the supply side, the investment side, we have experts in various asset classes that we have offerings in, like art finance or real estate, or so kind of knowing what's out there, what direction they're thinking of going in, and kind of looking at the software that we built and seeing like, okay, well, is there any commonality in there? Is there some common substrate? Like today, the Yieldstreet platform is completely agnostic to the asset class. Like, this the same engine that powers completely unrelated kind of asset classes like art finance and commercial real estate. So there's that abstraction that's already built in, but in terms of how do we continue that, we have to kind of like, this is where some of these very key bridge roles come in very handy, where people who are product people who have a very strong domain knowledge, who've been in financial service, who've been in structured finance, who can actually, because as you know, like engineers are, first of all, let's say we are a weird bunch, we have our own language, I mean, we're gonna like that, but, but in a sense, every specialized field has its own lingo, has its own vocabulary, right? And a lot can get lost in translation. So I think aside from having the strategic vision coming from the executives, we also need and we have some truly amazing people in that role who can bridge that gap, who speak product and tech, who can speak to an engineer, and who can also speak to a structured finance expert about what a mezzanine financing model looks like, and be able to make those connections and take it back to the engineering team, the technical architects, and tell them like, this is what we're talking about. So if we make this configurable and we make that configurable, we can actually support both. Like, so there is that translation layer, which is very critical in companies like Yieldstreet, which are software / technology on a very very specific and complex domain. I wouldn't presume to say it's easier for abstractions wise for e-commerce sites or whatever, but who knows? I'm sure they have their own complexities. But finance is a particularly interesting beast because it can get pretty intricate, and at some level, it's just not possible to design for everything. So we have to do things like, okay, well, this covers 90%. There's this 10% long tail. We'll just have an escape hatch for it. There's no set of configuration parameters that can satisfy this. So we'll give you a CSV upload thing. Just upload what the thing is, and we'll handle it. We'll just ignore the engine. So you always need to make those kinds of trade-offs, because otherwise you'll be constantly building and never shipping. It's the last place you want to be.
Yeah, no, I personally have several years of experience in the financial data as an engineer. And as you're talking about all of this, I'm just like, yep, because I've done projects all over the place, right? And a couple years here in real estate and contracts and financing and like CRM type stuff, and then straight up financial management and asset allocation and predicting withdrawal strategies, which is the most efficient withdrawal strategy given the 10 set of products. And then there could be 50 potential products, and then you add theirs and then you enter in the variables for them, and they're all, and wrapping your mind around all of that, I found it was a little addicting because every time something came up, it was so intricate because the way the financial world works, they just make a product. It's like they're sitting around, they're risk modeling, they just make it up, and they're like, here's the 20 variables that help define this product, and here's the outcome of it, and here's the lifetime contract value and like the payout, and like here's all the little the early withdrawal fees or maturity dates, and there's just so many things. It's honestly, I went into it, built this incredible software for 3 years, and then my partner bought me out. And I can't tell you like a whole lot of details because there's so many different financial products you can buy, and they all operate in such a different way, and you want to use them for different things. And as you compose them for your portfolio, you will it's almost like making music. It's kind of like beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like, don't you think, like, the technical or architectural brainstorming that goes into like distilling that to, okay, well, there's too much stuff here. If you keep whittling it down and simplifying it, what is the atomic piece that you bring it down to? So if you design for that, if you find your atomic Lego block in a way that, or set of Lego blocks that you can then just combine in different ways, that's the dream, right? It's not always possible, but that's kind of like some of the most fascinating architectural discussions we have at Yieldstreet, where it's like, okay, well, we have like these 4 things that are kind of sort of similar. At the end of the day, we are generating yield for investors, so at least that's in common. But what do we distill it down to in a way that not only will it solve these 4 use cases, but the next 6 use cases that'll come along that are slight variations of these? I would love to say we've done an amazing job doing that, but I will say that we have very few outliers. We've built some pretty good abstractions into the platform, which has actually allowed us to go from one asset class to another asset class and new products.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I think this is where past FUBARs come in very handy to teach you, like, okay, well, don't do that. Remember what happened back then? Like, so the second rodeo is always for me. I mean, you probably feel the same, but the second go around, when you see things like, and you get the sense of deja vu, and you remember the pain that you felt because you didn't just fire that one event, which would have helped you down the line. It's like, it's such a cool feeling. I love it.
That's the beautiful thing about getting older is understanding the value of experience and just like genuinely appreciating it. Something that's like impossible to do at a younger age. And you can't even really, it's like having kids, you don't know until you actually do it. But when you start to experience that, you're like, oh, we just saved 6 months by not going down that rabbit hole.
No, exactly what I'm talking about. This is, yeah.
So I have a theory. So I think in the financial space, I think it's the you have so many opportunities to have aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
It's those realizations from all the uniquenesses of trying to wrap your mind around specific products. And then because as you were speaking, what was running through my mind was the 3 years I spent where like all day I would be in a financial advisor's office, right? And just learning about the products and watching them sell to customers and all of these things. And then going back at night and like writing code. And then you did that for a year or two and then built a team and then finally got it out. But those moments of just sitting there like in frustration on the whiteboard for like the 10th time, having this guy explain to me how this product works. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it was this, and then getting it though, because the reward, that dopamine, I think it's dopamine, that dopamine hit you get when you're
Yeah.
like, all the dots connect and your whole brain lights up like some LED Rubik's cube, you
Yeah,
know?
you just run this algorithm, you see that line of numbers, and there's this like Excel spreadsheet with the numbers that it's supposed to be getting, and they match up to 2 decimals, and it's like, yes, I did it. I nailed
We
it,
got
you
it.
know?
We got it. Yeah, try writing a program without testing and financial services. Right?
That's a scary thought.
What's the long term like mission? Is it making these investments more accessible to broader market?
That has always been, and this is one of the things that I love about Yieldstreet, and having been at startups for a long time, it's actually surprisingly not as common, is a truly well defined and well solidified true north right from day zero. Like I have the pitch deck from 2014 that Milind, our founder and CEO, showed me. It was this bar in the Lower East Side where, he said like, okay, well, we didn't even have a name then. It was just like the new code deck, which I'm sure you've seen thousands of. And there was this vision slide in there, which kind of laid out a 5 to 6 year roadmap for what eventually became Yieldstreet in terms of what are the products that we will build, and ultimately what is our mission. And that mission, exactly to your point, has never changed. It's to democratize access to these kinds of funds, to build an avenue for everyday retail investors to diversify their investments and ultimately achieve their financial goals. So when you have more choice, when you have more options, when you're able to, you don't feel pigeonholed. Obviously, that's one thing, but it's this very specific gap where you have to choose between volatility or low yield, and that's just like it's just a very bad choice, because it's you're really kind of playing this, and then you come up with these kind of heuristic models of, okay, how much should be in cash and how much should be, but there is this entire third option, which is still fixed income with a higher yield. There's no risk-free investments, of course, like short of a CD or an FDIC insured account, there's risk everywhere. But how do you diversify that risk? How do you balance out the volatility of the public markets and the low yield of the cash accounts with a third option, which kind of combines the best of two, but with its own set of risk, of course. This is such an important thing for people to have access to, and that was kind of like the mission from day zero, to over time increasingly democratize this access and provide it to and not just democratize in terms of the number of people or investors. Certainly that's a big part, but really at what point in your financial life do you start getting access to it? These kind of products historically, even today, you have to kind of like, you're in your 50s or 60s and most of your debt's been paid down, and you have like some fairly stable assets like a home or whatever, and then you have some investable capital that you can now start deploying into these kinds of things because of the higher check sizes needed. We wanted to bring that down. It's like people are especially millennials. I'm sure you've seen any number of infographics that shows the level of debt that millennials are inheriting or coming into the working fold under. So just kind of like making sure, doing everything we can to make this access available to a broader audience at a lower age, at a younger age, so that they can start generating income much sooner than and like passive income much sooner than they historically had been able to. So that the mission has not changed. We kind of take a few turns in terms of whether this product is right or that product is right or this structure is right, but ultimately that's the long play. Eventually, the vision is to kind of like provide not only the optionality, the channels to invest in, but also a layer of like services on top of it, like that says, okay, we'll help you figure out. So we have a product called the Yieldstreet Wallet, which is basically a bank account, right? So today, largely it's used to fund your investments in Yieldstreet, but it's a straight up bank account. You can use it to pay bills. You can use it for direct deposit. You can use it for any number of things. And ultimately, if we can take the platform that we build and expand it out in a way that reduces financial friction in people's lives, that would be a huge win for us. And all of the bits and pieces are in place. Like this is one of the interesting things about fintech, certainly, is a lot of these kind of building blocks have become commoditized now. Like, the Betterments and Wealthfronts were amazing trailblazing companies, but now what they provide is available through an API play, so anyone can build a Betterment like product on top of these APIs. Anyone can build a banking product on top of this API without needing to be a bank. And you see them all around, Robin, Chime and Stash and all of these truly great companies. So the building blocks are being commoditized. So there is a big opportunity to ultimately simplify people's lives, financial lives, by giving them not only the access to all the different things that they could benefit from, but also giving them guidance on what is the best way to do it. So essentially bringing together the world of planning with the world of investing, with the world of, and we're certainly not the only people trying to do it, but I think we are kind of very interestingly positioned because of the diversity of the products that we have the ability to provide today, just on a single platform. Consolidation will always be a big friction reducer, right? So if I don't have to go to 5 different places to do 5 things, I can do at least 4, if not all 5 of them on a single platform. As a consumer, that's an attractive proposition for me.
Do you see yourself at all, like you mentioned, the infrastructure plays, right? Mm-hmm. Them building the bank account infrastructures and those types of things, so you can use their services to build on top of. At the same time, it seems like what Yieldstreet's doing is making the higher end investments, the accredited investor investments, more accessible at a younger age. So do you see yourself as laying the infrastructure for that style of investment, and in the future people will build on top of Yieldstreet?
Strategically, I can't say what we plan to do, but we have the, because honestly, on this particular angle, even I don't know, it's always from one of the things, but I can tell you this, that from a pure technology and infrastructure standpoint, we are already set up to do it. So, and that was always something that another thing that was a learning from LearnVest days of building in things like multi-tenancy and things like that right from the get-go. So we have the ability to do it. Whether we will, it's certainly something that we've considered, and we'll just see if and when that becomes a reality. Yeah. When you think about it, right? The way modern systems are built, with the front end and the back end and the infrastructure, in effect, every company, every software platform is an API platform. It's just that the APIs are not public. They're just used by themselves. But we're all API plays at some level, right? So that's what I meant. It's not whether that's a monetizable product. Who knows? I'm sure at some level of adoption, it would be, Betterment had been around for 8 years, I think, before a company like Drive Wealth came along, or maybe a little less, but, which is basically, they might as well just have taken Betterment's APIs and made them just an API play. It's essentially what it is. It's very valuable. So, which makes you wonder, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, makes you wonder about all of these disruptive companies, because a lot of the fintech disruption is really taking an old, existing, archaic space and bringing it into the digital age. Insurance, all of these are potential, or mortgages, and it's Better, Lemonade, all of these, they're all API players. They could be.
I love it because it's almost like they're using the technology as the excuse to give the people what they want, right? It's you could normally not do mortgages this way if you were to just open up a building and say, we're going to do a mortgage company, we're going to do it this way. But if I think Rocket Mortgage did something unique where, you could raise a bunch of money, get a bunch of people involved with this new future, and you realize how much you can do and how many resources are available and how much energy there is. And as you get more experience, you can understand how put these parts together, very Elon Musk ish, right? Where he's like, all right, what's the cost of this raw material? Let's overcome this hurdle of expensive batteries.
Exactly. It's a nice, it's a very, very, never thought of that way, but you're absolutely right. That's a very good parallel.
So are you doing any angel investing right now?
A little bit, yeah. I wish I had more angel investable capital, but no, I do. There are two areas that are very close to my heart. One, obviously, is fintech because I just know it. So I'm in a reasonably good position to evaluate the merits or lack thereof of a potential company. But I really care very deeply about health tech, digital health as well. In fact, for about a year between my LearnVest time and my Yieldstreet time, I teamed up with an old LearnVest friend of mine to start this digital health startup. It's kind of on the shelf right now. I hope to get back to that someday, but um, it's kind of like, a mint or personal capital, but for your personal health insurance rather than your financial accounts. So same idea, aggregate claims data and coverage data and actually provide like a unified. It's like a fun thing to build. And we spent about a year working on it, but that's an area that I think is absolutely screaming for. I hate using the word disruption just because it's too heavily used, but just simplification, like, de-obfuscating it for everyday people, health insurance in particular, but health in general. Health insurance is accessible because it's kind of like the intersection of health tech and fintech. But there is, in these two areas, I'm kind of like very interested in, doing small amounts of angel investments. I've done a few. Hopefully I'll have a little bit more capital to do some more. But no, I do a lot more advisory stuff than direct investing. And some are a bit of both. But yeah. And then a little bit just personal hobby type investing. Like I just invested in an indie motion picture. I always wanted to be on a set, so I thought it was one way to do it. So
problem solve, right? Yeah, you want to be on a set? Let's go invest in a movie. I want to talk to great people. Let's start a podcast.
Hey, it works.
So what are you learning right now as a leader? Because you lead the engineering team there, and you're always dealing with people and you're growing.
Of all the experiences that I learned from the LearnVest days that I brought over into Yieldstreet, hopefully largely in a positive / helpful way. One personal experience that I more or less forgot to bring over was the ability to, let's say I did bring it over, but not in enough measure, is the ability to kind of step out of the weeds. Because one of the things about how a CTO role evolves over the life of a startup, from if you're a founding CTO, your job on day 0, day 1, and the job post Series B or whatever, when you're scaled to a certain point, is phenomenally different. And the toughest part is to let go, to kind of like trust your people, to get the right people, get people that are way smarter than you. And I can safely say that we've done that at Yieldstreet, and not just like the leadership in tech, it's just like every blast engineer is like, I'm humbled by the quality of our team. But you're still a geek at the end of the day. And, you want to look at the Kibana logs, or, you want to run tail on some server log, or just get in and look at a PR. And at this scale, I probably should stop doing that. But it's hard to kind of yank myself away from it, just to see, and for me, it's kind of like an educational experience, because we went through this major re-architecture, and I'm like old school, man. When I was actively programming, it was like the old days of CRUD and SQL databases, and you had to go through a lot of hoops to create a cluster. And I know if you remember the old EJB days, But now, like the whole world is different. It's like I almost like I'm envious of the people on my team who get to code in all these amazing things like CQRS and event sourced microservices, and like Kafka is the source of truth. And like, man, I wish Kafka existed when I was actively programming. So like, I think the thing that I'm learning is that how to be okay with the fact that you don't know everything. You're responsible for a whole bunch of software, a whole bunch of technology that you don't necessarily understand that well to the kind of like the atomic level. Like, I can look at a PR and kind of roughly understand what's going on, but I mean, and I still try to find a little time to program here and there, but getting into that comfortable space, and this is typically true for people like us who are engineers who become CTOs who are just used to doing it, right? So being responsible for something that you're not building yourself and having that trust in the team that you've put together, it's an adjustment period. And it was tough. It was a little tricky for me back in LearnVest, and it's certainly a lot easier here, in part because I brought some of my old LearnVest people over as well. But it's something I'm learning every day. And like every time I get on a call with our head of infrastructure or some of our architects, I'm like, I just want to sit there and listen to you guys because this is amazing,
You want to like come in and see the team you put together operate, see your work happening.
Yeah. And I was like, it was interesting discovery that, like, when you're a like 3 or 4 person team, you're actively programming, you're designing, you're doing the deploys and shipping. There's no Ansible, there's no Terraform. It's all manual in the first month. But when you're in a meeting, and this is also the thing that I'm still getting used to, is when you say something, and I was told this by some of my, some of the leaders on my team. It's like, okay, well, I know you were just voicing an opinion, and a totally justified opinion, but when you say it, it comes across as, okay, stop doing what you're doing and do it this way. When I'm just wondering, hey, can it be done this way? So this like kind of implicit megaphone that you get, which is simply not something that you're used to as a founding CTO, because you're all huddled in a garage or like this one co-working space, and you're just cranking out code with everyone else. And it's a completely level playing field. And at a certain scale, it stops being that. And you have to kind of tell yourself like, okay, get out of the weeds, and be careful where you make. And it's just a weird place to be for me anyway. It's like, because I always wanted to be in the weeds, hanging with the engineers and knowing what they're doing and contributing an idea or two. And I still do that, but it doesn't come across as just an opinion or an idea. It's a lot more than that. That's kind of one of my biggest adjustment areas, if you will.
Yeah, it's about what you want and where you're best suited in the company. So everyone always asks, what's the responsibilities of a CTO? I'm like, oh man, here we go. But like, as you said, it changes drastically based on the business model, the stage of the business, all of these different things. But one of the interesting like patterns I see is that the people who do like to be really hands-on, usually situate themselves in this office of the CTO model, where they'll hire like a great like head of engineering to sort of perform like the day-to-day of running the engineering org. And then they'll sit in this corner with like 8 people, either solving problems for the engineering org, like from like an outside perspective, or doing like, moonshots, like new projects and testing new things out. So they'll still get to be in that small room with those few people, in the weeds, but at the same time, they've made sure to cover for the responsibilities that they need for that like VPE or whatever role you want to call it. But it doesn't matter what the label is. It's that there's the human performing that function of leading that side of the org. And then they have this little subset called Office of the CTO. And I found that really fascinating too.
That is a great idea. Hey, yeah, thanks. That's going to be on my 2021 strategic roadmap for, let me see, I'll run it by our CEO, see what he thinks. I love that.
Yeah.
This was so much fun, Joel. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Talk soon, buddy.
All right. Have a good one.